Inside America's most feared ADX Florence Supermax prison, the multi-million-dollar isolation system, finance prison documentary. This documentary investigates the financial structure behind ADX Florence, the United States' highest security federal prison located in Florence, Colorado. Operated by the Federal Bureau of Prisons under the U.S. Department of Justice, ADX Florence was designed to hold inmates considered the most dangerous or high risk in the federal system. According to federal budget documents and congressional testimony, ADX Florence costs significantly more per inmate than standard federal correctional institutions. With extreme security infrastructure, prolonged solitary confinement practices, specialized staffing ratios, and advanced surveillance systems, the facility represents one of the most expensive incarceration models in the country. This investigation examines the funding model behind ADX Florence, the cost per inmate, federal appropriations, procurement contracts, oversight mechanisms, and the broader economic question: what is the true financial cost of extreme isolation, and who ultimately pays for it? The price of absolute control. In the high desert of southern Colorado, beyond the town limits of Florence, stands a complex of concrete and steel that rarely appears in public conversation yet consumes millions of taxpayer dollars every year. ADX Florence is often described as the most secure federal prison in the United States. Officially named the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, it was opened in 1994 after a series of violent incidents at other federal institutions prompted calls for a more controlled, restrictive environment. According to Bureau of Prisons records, it was designed to hold inmates who present unique security concerns or who require the highest level of supervision. But beyond its reputation lies a financial structure few Americans examine closely. According to data published by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the average annual cost of housing a federal inmate in a standard high-security penitentiary is substantially lower than housing an inmate at ADX Florence. In recent Bureau of Prisons budget reports submitted to Congress, per-inmate costs at high-security facilities have often ranged in the tens of thousands of dollars annually. At ADX Florence, that number is widely reported to be significantly higher due to enhanced staffing requirements, infrastructure maintenance, and specialized security measures. The prison was built following the 1983 murders of two federal correctional officers at the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. In response, the Bureau of Prisons implemented permanent lockdown procedures at Marion and eventually sought funding for a purpose-built Supermax facility. Congressional appropriations funded the development of ADX Florence as part of the broader federal correctional complex in Florence, Colorado. From its inception, ADX was designed not just as a prison, but as a containment system. Each inmate is housed in a single cell constructed of reinforced concrete. The doors are remote-controlled. Communication between inmates is heavily restricted. Recreation occurs alone in enclosed spaces. According to Bureau of Prisons policy statements, inmates at ADX spend up to 23 hours a day inside their cells. This degree of isolation requires infrastructure. Unlike lower security facilities that rely on dormitory-style housing and group supervision, ADX operates with a far higher staff-to-inmate ratio. Correctional officers must monitor individuals separately. Surveillance systems operate continuously. Electronic locking mechanisms, reinforced construction materials, and perimeter security systems require regular maintenance contracts. According to federal budget justifications submitted to Congress by the Department of Justice, personnel costs represent the largest portion of Bureau of Prisons expenditures. Salaries, benefits, training, and overtime payments account for billions of dollars annually across the federal prison system. High security and administrative maximum facilities demand additional staffing layers, including specialized response teams and mental health professionals. The Bureau of Prisons' overall budget has fluctuated around $7 to $8 billion annually in recent years, according to Department of Justice budget documents. Within that allocation, high-security facilities consume a disproportionate share per capita due to operational intensity. Although the Bureau does not always break down individual prison costs publicly, investigative reporting and oversight hearings have repeatedly confirmed that Supermax incarceration is among the most expensive correctional models in the country. Construction itself was costly. While original construction figures from the early 1990s vary across reports, federal appropriations covered tens of millions of dollars to build the Florence complex. Adjusted for inflation, those construction expenditures would be significantly higher in today's dollars. The materials used, reinforced concrete, specialized ventilation systems, secure sally ports, and redundant perimeter fencing, were not typical of minimum or medium security institutions. The economic model of ADX Florence reflects a philosophy of risk elimination rather than cost efficiency. Unlike local jails, which rely on county budgets and frequently struggle with funding shortages, ADX is funded through federal appropriations. That means American taxpayers nationwide contribute to its operation. Budget allocations are debated annually in congressional appropriations committees, where funding levels for the Bureau of Prisons are determined. Critics have questioned whether extreme isolation justifies its cost. In various oversight hearings and inspector general reviews, lawmakers have examined whether Supermax incarceration achieves measurable public safety outcomes relative to its financial burden. Some reports have raised concerns about long-term solitary confinement and associated healthcare costs. Mental health treatment for inmates subjected to extended isolation can increase medical expenditures, which are also funded through federal allocations. Healthcare represents another significant cost center. According to Department of Justice reports, inmate medical care has grown as a share of the Bureau of Prisons budget over the past 2 decades. High-security inmates, including those serving long sentences, often require ongoing medical and psychological services. In a facility designed for isolation, delivering that care requires additional staffing, security escorts, and infrastructure modifications. Every movement inside ADX Florence involves labor hours. A medical visit is not simply a scheduled appointment. It requires coordinated escort by multiple officers. Maintenance inside a Supermax environment involves strict protocols. Even meal delivery occurs under heightened security standards. Each procedural layer adds cost. Procurement contracts support the system behind the walls. Federal prisons purchase food supplies, security equipment, surveillance systems, maintenance services, and healthcare-related products through government contracting processes. These contracts are subject to federal procurement rules, competitive bidding procedures, and oversight by inspectors general. Vendors supplying equipment to high-security facilities often specialize in hardened infrastructure technologies. While ADX Florence is not privately operated, it is run directly by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The ecosystem around it includes private contractors, construction firms, technology providers, food service suppliers, and maintenance vendors all receive government funds through federal contracts. The question becomes structural rather than personal. Who benefits from ADX Florence financially is less about individuals and more about institutional funding streams. Federal employment in correctional facilities provides stable government jobs in rural communities. The Florence complex is one of the region's largest employers. Salaries paid to correctional officers circulate within the local economy. Infrastructure spending benefits construction and maintenance sectors. In that sense, ADX Florence is both a security institution and an economic engine. According to regional economic data cited in local government reports, correctional facilities often stabilize employment in small towns. Federal prisons provide predictable payroll and federal benefits. That stability can create political resistance to prison closures or downsizing efforts. But the broader fiscal question remains. If Supermax incarceration costs substantially more per inmate than other forms of imprisonment, what measurable return does the system provide? Does it reduce violence system-wide? Does it deter misconduct in other facilities? Does it prevent future expenditures tied to institutional instability? Supporters argue that ADX Florence isolates individuals deemed too dangerous for other facilities, thereby protecting staff and inmates elsewhere. Critics question whether prolonged isolation produces long-term social costs, including litigation expenses and healthcare burdens. Litigation has added another financial dimension. Over the years, lawsuits have been filed challenging conditions at ADX Florence, including claims related to mental health treatment and prolonged isolation. Court proceedings require Department of Justice resources. Settlements or mandated reforms can generate additional expenditures. According to court filings and investigative reporting, legal scrutiny has prompted policy adjustments at various times. Oversight mechanisms exist, but transparency has limits. The Bureau of Prisons submits budget justifications to Congress, and the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General conducts audits and evaluations. However, facility-specific cost breakdowns are not always detailed in publicly accessible documents. Much of the financial architecture must be inferred from aggregate data and oversight testimony. What is clear is that ADX Florence represents one of the most resource-intensive incarceration models in the federal system. Every year it operates, it absorbs federal funds allocated through taxpayer revenue. Every year, Congress debates appropriations that determine whether funding increases, decreases, or remains stable. Those debates are influenced by broader criminal justice policy discussions, including sentencing reform, prison population levels, and federal prosecution priorities. As of recent Bureau of Prisons population statistics, the overall federal inmate population has declined from its peak in the early 2010s. Yet the infrastructure of Supermax confinement remains intact. ADX Florence continues to operate at a cost significantly higher per inmate than standard facilities. And that raises a central financial question that extends beyond Colorado. In a system already costing billions annually, what is the long-term economic logic of extreme isolation? Is it a necessary expense for national security and institutional control? Or is it an enduring example of how security-driven policy decisions can lock governments into high-cost operational models for decades? The answers are not simple. But the numbers, drawn from federal budgets and public records, reveal a consistent pattern. Absolute control comes at a price. And that price is paid every fiscal year. The federal funding machine. ADX Florence does not operate on mystery money. It runs on line items, appropriations bills, personnel accounts, procurement codes, and congressional authorizations. The fortress in the Colorado desert is powered not only by reinforced concrete and steel doors, but by federal budget mechanisms that determine how billions are allocated across the American prison system. To understand the financial structure behind ADX Florence, it is necessary to zoom out first. The facility is operated by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, an agency within the U.S. Department of Justice. According to Department of Justice budget documents submitted annually to Congress, the Bureau of Prisons consistently represents one of the largest components of the DOJ's discretionary spending. In recent fiscal years, the Bureau's total budget has hovered in the range of approximately $7 to $8 billion. That budget covers more than 120 federal institutions nationwide, regional offices, training centers, and administrative divisions. Within that structure, ADX Florence is classified as an administrative maximum facility, the highest security designation in the federal system. Funding for ADX does not appear as a single bold line labeled Supermax. Instead, it is embedded within broader appropriations for salaries and expenses, buildings and facilities, and federal prison operations. Personnel costs form the financial backbone. According to publicly available DOJ budget justifications, more than two-thirds of the Bureau of Prisons' operating budget is devoted to salaries and benefits. Correctional officers, lieutenants, captains, medical professionals, psychologists, case managers, food service staff, maintenance workers, and administrative personnel all draw federal pay. ADX Florence requires higher staffing intensity than lower security institutions. Because inmates are housed individually and movement is strictly controlled, basic tasks require multiple officers. Escorting one inmate to a medical appointment may require coordinated staffing that would not be necessary in a medium security setting. Recreation periods are staggered. Meals are distributed individually. Security checks are constant. Higher staffing ratios translate into higher costs per inmate. According to Bureau of Prisons data, the average annual cost per inmate across all federal facilities varies by security level. Minimum security camps are the least expensive. High-security penitentiaries cost significantly more. Administrative facilities such as ADX Florence tend to be among the most expensive categories. While precise per-inmate figures for ADX specifically are not always itemized publicly, various oversight discussions and investigative reports have consistently indicated that Supermax confinement can cost tens of thousands of dollars more per inmate annually compared to lower security facilities. This difference is not only about labor. Security technology drives procurement spending. ADX Florence operates with reinforced cell doors controlled electronically from secure stations. Surveillance cameras cover interior corridors. Perimeter systems include detection equipment, fencing layers, and controlled access gates. Electronic monitoring infrastructure requires ongoing maintenance contracts. Federal procurement databases show that the Bureau of Prisons contracts with private vendors for everything from food supplies to mechanical systems maintenance. These contracts are awarded through regulated bidding processes, often under multi-year agreements. The vendors change over time. The structure does not. Food services, for example, are frequently supplied through large-scale government food distribution contracts. Even though ADX inmates eat alone in their cells, the supply chain resembles that of other federal institutions. The difference lies in delivery logistics. In a Supermax facility, food distribution is slower, more controlled, and more labor-intensive. Healthcare spending represents another expanding cost category. According to Department of Justice Inspector General reports, inmate healthcare costs have grown significantly over the past 2 decades. The federal prison population includes aging inmates, some serving decades-long sentences. At high-security institutions such as ADX Florence, specialized mental health services are often necessary due to the psychological strain associated with long-term isolation. Mental health treatment requires licensed professionals. Psychologists and psychiatrists draw federal salaries. Treatment plans require documentation and monitoring. Medication costs are borne by the federal system. Every additional healthcare need translates into additional expenditure. Infrastructure maintenance compounds the financial picture. A Supermax facility cannot deteriorate without risk. Locks must function flawlessly. Ventilation systems must maintain secure airflow. Surveillance systems must operate continuously. Unlike lower security environments where wear and tear may be tolerated temporarily, ADX Florence relies on constant operational integrity. According to federal budget justifications under the Buildings and Facilities account, the Bureau of Prisons allocates funds annually for modernization, repair, and major construction projects. While not every project is ADX specific, administrative maximum facilities require consistent capital investment to maintain hardened standards. Then there is litigation risk. According to court filings over the years, lawsuits have challenged aspects of confinement conditions at ADX Florence. Legal defense costs are absorbed by the Department of Justice. In some cases, court-mandated reforms or settlement agreements can increase operational spending. For example, enhanced mental health screening procedures or expanded treatment programs require additional staffing and training. Litigation does not shut down the facility. It modifies it, often at financial cost. Congressional oversight occasionally scrutinizes these expenditures. Members of Congress review Inspector General findings and conduct hearings on prison conditions, staffing shortages, and budget efficiency. Yet ADX Florence has remained operational for decades without serious congressional moves toward closure. One reason may be structural inertia. Federal prisons represent long-term capital investments. Once constructed, they are expensive to close. Closure would require transferring inmates, reassigning staff, potentially providing severance or relocation benefits, and addressing local economic fallout. Florence, Colorado, hosts not just ADX but an entire federal correctional complex. According to local economic reports and employment data, the prison complex is one of the region's largest employers. Federal correctional jobs provide stable income, retirement benefits, and healthcare coverage. Payroll circulates within the local economy, supporting housing markets, retail businesses, and public services. In this way, ADX Florence becomes economically embedded. Closing such a facility would not only change incarceration policy, it would disrupt a regional employment base. That dynamic often influences political calculations around prison reform. But what about revenue? Unlike private prisons operated by corporations under contract, ADX Florence does not generate profit for shareholders. It is a government-run facility funded through taxpayer dollars. However, the ecosystem surrounding it includes private contractors, technology providers, maintenance firms, and suppliers who receive federal payments. The financial flow does not stop at the prison gate. Federal appropriations move from Congress to the Department of Justice, from the DOJ to the Bureau of Prisons, and from the Bureau to payroll accounts and vendor contracts. Each fiscal year, billions circulate through this system. The Bureau of Prisons has, at times, faced staffing shortages and budget pressures. According to Inspector General reports, understaffing in certain institutions has led to overtime spikes, which further increase costs. Overtime payments can significantly inflate personnel expenditures when staffing levels fall below authorized targets. In high-security facilities, overtime can become a recurring expense. Safety protocols cannot be compromised. If staff are absent, replacements must be scheduled. If posts are vacant, overtime fills the gap. The cost accumulates quietly within personnel accounts. Meanwhile, broader criminal justice trends affect funding levels. When federal inmate populations rise, pressure mounts for expansion. When populations fall, there are debates about consolidation or closure of facilities. According to Bureau of Prison Statistics, the federal prison population peaked in the early 2010s and has since declined. Yet fixed costs, infrastructure, staffing structures, capital maintenance, remain substantial. ADX Florence continues to operate regardless of national incarceration trends. It represents a permanent layer within the federal correctional hierarchy. Its function is not volume. It is containment of individuals deemed the highest security risk. From a purely economic perspective, that makes it a specialized expense category. The central financial question becomes more focused: is the cost of maintaining a permanent Supermax facility justified by the number of inmates it houses and the security objectives it serves? Supporters argue that concentrating high-risk inmates in one controlled environment prevents violence in other institutions, potentially reducing broader system costs. Critics argue that extreme isolation can generate mental health deterioration, increasing long-term healthcare expenses and legal liability. Both arguments intersect with budget math. The Bureau of Prisons must balance congressional appropriations against operational needs. Every dollar allocated to ADX Florence is a dollar not allocated elsewhere within the justice system. Opportunity cost is rarely discussed publicly, but it exists within every federal budget. Funding prisons competes with funding courts, law enforcement grants, rehabilitation programs, and crime prevention initiatives. The administrative maximum model embodies a specific philosophy: invest heavily in control to prevent instability. But control is expensive. As Chapter 2 closes, one pattern becomes unmistakable. ADX Florence is not financially accidental. It is the product of deliberate policy choices made in response to past violence, codified through congressional funding, and sustained through annual appropriations. The system functions because the money continues to flow. In Chapter 3, the focus shifts to the broader economic impact: how the Supermax model influences national incarceration spending, reform debates, and the long-term fiscal architecture of punishment in America. The long-term cost of isolation. ADX Florence was built as a solution. It emerged from a specific moment in federal prison history when policymakers concluded that certain individuals could not be safely managed within the existing system. The answer was structural: Build a facility designed for permanent, near-total isolation. Reinforce the walls. Harden the doors. Limit movement. Eliminate contact. Congress funded it. The Bureau of Prisons staffed it. Taxpayers have sustained it every year since 1994. But 3 decades later, the financial question has shifted. The debate is no longer only about whether ADX Florence can contain high-risk inmates. The deeper question is whether the long-term economic architecture of Supermax confinement aligns with modern correctional policy, and whether the costs extend beyond the Bureau of Prisons' annual appropriations. According to Department of Justice budget submissions, the Bureau of Prisons consistently consumes a substantial share of DOJ discretionary spending. In certain fiscal years, it has represented roughly a quarter of the department's total discretionary budget. That proportion has drawn attention from lawmakers across the political spectrum, particularly during periods of federal deficit concern. The administrative maximum model contributes to that budget pressure. Although ADX Florence houses only a small fraction of the federal prison population, its operational intensity makes it one of the most expensive incarceration models per capita. Even if the total number of inmates is relatively limited compared to other institutions, the per-inmate expenditure remains significantly higher due to staffing, infrastructure, and healthcare demands. This is the paradox of Supermax economics. Low volume. High cost. The federal prison population has declined from its peak in the early 2010s, according to Bureau of Prison Statistics. Sentencing reforms and changes in federal charging priorities contributed to a gradual reduction. Yet fixed infrastructure costs, including those associated with ADX Florence, remain embedded in the system. Prisons are not subscription services that scale down easily. Once built, they require maintenance. Staff positions are authorized. Federal employees receive benefits and pensions. Physical structures age and require repair. Even if inmate populations fluctuate, the base cost of operating a Supermax facility persists. In public finance, this is known as structural expenditure. Closing a facility like ADX Florence would not simply eliminate costs. It would trigger transition costs. Inmates would need to be transferred to other high-security institutions. Staff would require reassignment, relocation, or potential reduction in force procedures. Contracts would need renegotiation or termination. Infrastructure would require decommissioning. These transition costs often deter rapid policy shifts. But the financial implications extend beyond operational budgets. Healthcare spending continues to rise within the federal prison system. According to multiple Department of Justice Inspector General reports, inmate medical costs have increased over time, partly due to an aging prison population and the complexity of chronic care. In a Supermax environment, delivering healthcare requires additional security measures, which compounds cost. Mental health care is particularly relevant. Over the years, litigation and investigative reporting have raised concerns about the psychological impact of prolonged isolation. Court filings have documented claims related to mental health treatment adequacy at ADX Florence. In response to legal scrutiny, the Bureau of Prisons has implemented policy adjustments, including mental health screening improvements and step-down programs for certain inmates. Reform is not free. Expanding mental health services requires hiring qualified professionals. It requires training correctional officers. It may require retrofitting spaces for therapeutic use. Each reform initiative increases the operational budget. The economic cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Heightened security leads to higher costs. Legal scrutiny leads to additional safeguards. Additional safeguards increase expenditure. Yet the fundamental architecture of isolation remains intact. Meanwhile, broader national debates about incarceration shift toward rehabilitation, re-entry, and cost reduction. State prison systems across the country have experimented with diversion programs and sentencing reforms to reduce incarceration expenses. Federal reforms, including the First Step Act of 2018, aimed to adjust sentencing practices and expand programming opportunities. ADX Florence sits somewhat apart from these reforms. Its mission is not rehabilitation in the conventional sense. It is containment. Inmates are assigned there based on security assessments. While step-down programs exist to allow eventual transfer to lower security facilities in some cases, the core function remains high-control confinement. From a budgetary standpoint, that function must be justified annually. Every fiscal year, the Department of Justice submits budget justifications to Congress outlining the necessity of its prison expenditures. Lawmakers review these documents during appropriations hearings. Questions arise about staffing shortages, overtime costs, facility maintenance backlogs, and healthcare expenditures. Supermax facilities are rarely the sole focus of these hearings, but they form part of the broader financial landscape. The opportunity cost becomes increasingly visible. Federal spending is finite. Allocating billions to incarceration limits funds available for prevention programs, community-based supervision, victim services, and other justice initiatives. Policymakers must weigh whether high-cost confinement models deliver proportional public safety benefits. Supporters of ADX Florence argue that isolating high-risk individuals reduces violence in other institutions, potentially lowering overall system costs. They contend that without a facility like ADX, disruptive or dangerous inmates would destabilize high-security penitentiaries, leading to increased assaults, property damage, and litigation. Critics question the empirical evidence supporting that claim. They point to research suggesting that long-term solitary confinement may exacerbate mental health issues, complicating eventual reintegration and increasing long-term healthcare costs. They argue that extreme isolation is not only a humanitarian concern but also a fiscal one. Both positions intersect with public accountability. Unlike private prisons operated by corporations, ADX Florence does not produce shareholder earnings. It is funded directly by taxpayers. However, the broader economic ecosystem includes private contractors providing goods and services under federal procurement rules. Security technology vendors, maintenance contractors, food suppliers, and medical service providers all receive payments derived from congressional appropriations. These contracts are subject to oversight, yet they represent ongoing financial relationships between government and private industry. The structure resembles a public sector industrial model. Congress allocates funds. Agencies distribute funds. Contractors execute services. Employees receive salaries. Local economies benefit from payroll stability. The system becomes embedded within regional and national economic networks. Florence, Colorado illustrates this dynamic clearly. The Federal Correctional Complex in Florence employs hundreds of federal workers. According to local economic reports, correctional employment supports housing demand, retail activity, and municipal revenue. The prison complex contributes to economic stability in the region. This local benefit complicates national reform conversations. Calls to reduce prison infrastructure must account for employment consequences. Federal correctional officers are unionized federal employees. Policy changes affecting ADX Florence ripple outward into labor negotiations and regional economic considerations. Thus, the financial structure surrounding ADX Florence extends far beyond inmate housing costs. It includes pensions and retirement obligations for federal employees. It includes healthcare benefits for staff. It includes infrastructure depreciation. It includes federal liability exposure in litigation. It includes contract renewals and capital improvement projects. And it includes the intangible cost of institutional permanence. Once a Supermax facility exists, it shapes policy decisions. Its presence enables certain sentencing practices. Its capacity influences classification systems. It becomes part of the federal correctional toolkit. Dismantling that toolkit would require not only budget adjustments but political consensus. As of recent years, no such consensus has emerged. ADX Florence remains operational. Its funding continues through annual appropriations. Its role within the federal system persists. The broader economic question becomes philosophical as much as fiscal. How much is the federal government willing to spend to guarantee maximum control over a small number of high-risk inmates? What is the monetary value assigned to institutional stability? How does that value compare to alternative investments in crime prevention or rehabilitation? These questions do not produce simple answers. They appear in budget tables, hearing transcripts, inspector general reports, and academic research. They rarely appear in headlines. Yet they shape billions of dollars in spending. ADX Florence represents a concentrated expression of a national decision, that certain forms of control justify extraordinary expenditure. The facility's reinforced walls are visible. The financial architecture sustaining it is less visible, but equally solid. Every locked door is backed by a budget line. Every surveillance camera is supported by a procurement contract. Every staff escort reflects salary appropriations approved by Congress. The Supermax model is not only a security decision. It is an economic commitment. And like all long-term commitments funded by public revenue, it invites scrutiny. Whether the future of federal incarceration continues to include high-cost isolation or shifts toward alternative models will depend on policy debates still unfolding. For now, ADX Florence stands as a case study in the economics of extreme confinement, a place where control is measured not only in steel and concrete, but in millions of dollars allocated year after year. This documentary is based on publicly available records, financial reports, and investigative journalism. Some details may be simplified for narrative clarity.